Welcome. You're in the Yoga Nook with Robbie. I'm Robbie S.D. Willick. And today we're going to go through a short series of poses, some options for lower back issues like a bulging disc or a slip disc, a herniated disc. A disc is a space cushion-like structure that is sandwiched between vertebrae, so the individual backbones of the spine. There is a gel-like substance contained within this fibrous container. And when you have some muscle tension that compresses the vertebrae together in the lower back or elsewhere in the spine, that water balloon-like structure, that space cushion tends to expand, its width increases. And as the width increases, the bulging of the disc increases, there's potential for the nerves to be compressed, the spinal nerves. And these are the nerves that emerge from the spinal cord. They have to pass through a very small space between adjacent vertebrae. And at that location, the nerves, those spinal nerves, are prone to some compression from a disc when it's under too much pressure and it begins to bulge. Or you can have a tearing of that fibrous container of the disc, and the gel-like substance within the disc begins to spill out of that container and compress on the spinal nerves, leading to, in the lower back, localized pain of a fairly significant nature in the lower back, and often symptoms in the leg, like pain in the butt, sciatic pain, pain throughout the leg, front of the leg, back of the leg, even the sides of the leg. And the majority of disc injuries they occur in a disc at a very specific place that if you're engaging in postures like a slumping posture, a lot of seated desk work, having to drive a car a lot, or even just reading, watching TV on a chair or sofa, we tend to be in a bit of a slumped position, a slouched position. And that position tends to put a lot of pressure on the discs. And again, there's potential when there is an increase in the size of the disc to have some pressure on the nerves. So these options that we're going to show today are really designed to reverse that postural tendency. Instead of being in that slumped forward bend position, most of these poses are in a bit of an extension position, a back bend position. And they're also based on an exercise program called the Mackenzie Back Program. Robin Mackenzie was a New Zealand physiotherapist who developed this program back in the 1950s and was popularized in the 1980s. Continued to be used today, mostly in the physiotherapy world. But these yoga-based poses have some strong consistency between the exercise, the Mackenzie exercise program, the back program, and some good options for helping to alleviate that compression on the discs and even alleviate pressure on the spinal nerves. Keeping in mind, if you're working with a physician around these problems, it's always a good idea to check in with your physician about the appropriateness of this type of exercise program. Or if you're working with an osteopath, a physiotherapist, a chiropractor, another healthcare practitioner who has some good knowledge about disc injuries and self-care modalities, remedial exercise to address these issues, it's a good idea to check in with them just to make sure that if you have a diagnosed injury, that specific injury or the location of the injury of the disc is at a spot that would be appropriate for you to do these exercises. There is potential, if it is in a different location, that you can increase the pressure on the disc and lead to some exacerbation of symptoms. So just a double check. But again, most of the injuries occur in a specific location of the disc that would make this exercise program appropriate, and always keeping in mind comfort. If you're having pain, discomfort, unusual symptoms, just discontinue and check in with a trusted healthcare provider. So that said, let's get going. Okay, let's get to it. We're going to start with a core activation exercise. This is a way of kind of tuning into what your core really is. We often hear use your core or developing core strength. But it's helpful to really kind of break it down and identify what your core is and how to activate it. So lying on the floor or on your yoga mat, you're going to take a towel, and lengthwise, you'll fold it in half and then in half again, so you have a long strip. And you're going to place it along the floor. And you're simply going to lie on your back so that towel is underneath your lower back area. We're going to keep the knees bent here. Arms just comfortable distance out to your side, or you can even hold on to the edges of the towel, the ends of the towel. We're going to begin with a little pressing of the lower back down into the mat. So the lower back naturally has a bit of an arch in it. We want to press that lower back down into the mat and then release it again. So it's a little bit of a feeling of the tailbone or the sit bones, the bones that you sit on if you're in a chair, lifting up toward the ceiling and then just lowering back down. As you tilt the sit bones and the tailbone up toward the ceiling, you'll feel your back, your lower back pressing into that towel area. So you're going to just maintain that position and then thinking of your belly button. Just a light drawing in of the belly button toward the spine. This activates the layers of abdominal muscle to create a bit of a tensing or a toning of those abdominal muscles. Even just doing this, we're creating a subtle activation of the core muscles, some of the muscles that span the lower back and the abdominal area. You can further engage that core activation by doing a bit of a hissing motion or an S sound, just a long S sound. So we're making that sound. It creates a little bit more activation, a little bit more contraction of the abdominal muscles used to sustain that kind of controlled exhalation and expiration of air. So you can continue with that, taking a break as you need to with that hissing sound. And you can also start to create a bit of an increase in the activation of the abdominal muscles by, with your back gently, lightly pressing into the surface you're lying on, trying to pull that towel out from underneath you, but pressing your back in enough so that you are not allowing that to happen. That's creating, again, a little bit more activation of the muscles of the core to maintain that towel where it is. So very simple. You can play with that for a number of minutes, maybe doing a few repetitions of that hissing breath, that S long S exhalation. Or you can move right into another core activation exercise, the half bridge pose or Setu Bandhasana. So for this, you can use some blocks or bolsters or little throw cushions from your couch. I have a couple of blocks here. One block is usually sufficient. If you don't have a block, you can use an article that's like a block, a sturdy food container, or even a blanket or a towel that's rolled up a number of thicknesses. So it's about 4 inches high or so. Setu Bandhasana, the half bridge pose, is a position where you can lie on your back and simply going to raise the pelvis up. You can have these blocks handy. You don't necessarily need them though. We'll have them here just for some modifications or some options as we move into the pose. So we want to think again about that light toning of the belly button, just drawing in subtly towards the spine, like a half-inch movement. You're not sucking in your gut, you're not sucking the belly in, just a little toning where you feel your belly button moving in closer towards the inner aspect of your body, close to your spine. Doing that, we can engage a little motion of the pelvis, again, a little rolling up of the spine. You can see my tailbone, my pelvis is lifted up, and then lowering back down. Just a simple rocking, a little rolling, lifting up of the spine. You can play with how high you want to maintain this position, but at the very highest, we still want to keep our shoulder blades in contact with the mat. We don't want to be having a lot of pressure coming to bear on the lower part of the neck or the very upper part of the rib cage. We really want to keep that weight distributed across the shoulder blades. Bringing your pelvis up from the surface you're resting on, it requires a little bit of activation of the glute muscles, also a contraction of the muscles in the lower back, part of your core complex, part of the core. And it creates a bit of a lengthening in some of their core muscles, the psoas muscle in particular that starts in the lower back area, just at the belly button level, attaching to the spine, all through the vertebra of the lower back, and then attaching just below the hips. This is a way to stretch out that muscle. When that muscle is tight, you have one on either side. When that muscle is tight, it tends to be on the weak side. This is a way of not only strengthening the muscles of the core and back body, but lengthening and stretching out the muscles of the core and front body, in particular psoas and another hip flexor muscle, part of the quads, rectus femoris, that goes from just above the hip to just below the knee. So I've been holding this for quite some time. That's certainly not necessary. If you're just developing some core strength, even holding for a few seconds is often quite a bit of a core challenge. So you can do a few seconds of elevation, maybe about 5 seconds, and then lowering back down. A nice rolling wave-like motion of the spine as you're lifting and lowering, even thinking of the spine one vertebra at a time, lifting one, just nice little fluid wave-like motion, and then rolling back down one vertebra at a time, connecting. If you're finding that you're feeling a little bit of fatigue, but you're getting some benefit out of that pose, well, you can place a bolster underneath your spine. Even in this position, you're creating a little bit of a lengthening of the spine, or of the hip flexor muscle rather. Or you can place a block and a bolster underneath your spine. In this position, we have a supported half bridge. For some people, this might be enough where you're feeling a bit of a stretch through the tops of the thighs, the front of the thighs, the muscles crossing the front of the hips. If you want to be in this position, the supported position, you can take one leg and just straighten it out in front of you, keeping the other knee bent. So you're getting a bit of a lengthening of the hip flexors, some of those core muscles, in this example, on the right side. Not appropriate for everybody, but you may want to explore a partial straightening of that left leg. Maybe it's comfortable for you to extend both legs. This is not necessary, but this is a more advanced version. You're certainly okay to stay with that one leg extended, or even just that lifting and lowering. The dynamic version, lifting the pelvis, lowering the pelvis, a good way to foster that core strength. So you can again take more time with this if you like. We're going to move into another core strengthener. So this is the Cobra pose, Bhujangasana. This is a more advanced expression of the pose, and it may not be appropriate for everybody. It creates a little bit of a compression of the joints in the lower back, and if you're feeling a sense of strain, you're going to start more modestly. That modest position would even be to come onto your belly, cross your hands, and resting your forehead, or turning your head to the side if that's more comfortable for you, and resting like this. Even this position is a very modest back bend, helps to create a bit of a stretch through the muscles of the front of the hips, the hip flexor muscles. You can also bend the knees in this position to create a little bit more of a lengthening or a stretch of those muscles. If this position is okay for you, you can explore one fist resting your forehead on that, or one fist stacked on another, just resting your forehead there, or resting your chin, a little support for your chin in that position. Again, here we're in a relative back bend. If you can do this comfortably, you can explore a little bit more advanced version. Again, our starting position where we had our forearms and our palms in contact with the mat, using our elbows to create some support, our forearms and our elbows to create some support in this position. We also want to think about having a bit of a lengthening of the spine. So the crown of the head, the top of the head, feeling of moving it away from the pelvis. You can enhance that by kind of anchoring your forearms and your elbows into the mat with the idea of lifting your spine or extending or lengthening your spine away from the pelvis. The more advanced option, and this is significantly more advanced, this is not something to do if you're not sure, but as you progress, if you're feeling confident in your ability to do this, You can come up a little bit higher. So palms on the floor, chest and belly moving a little bit further away. This increases that potential for compression in the lower back, so you can stay with a more modest option. So this is the Cobra pose, Bhujangasana. There's also a pose called the Locust, which is a little bit more challenging pose in terms of strengthening the muscles in the core, mostly in the back body. And it looks like this. So we'll start bringing your forehead or head back down to the floor. We'll have our chin resting on our hands or just on your mat. You can have your arms by your sides, palms facing up toward the ceiling. Maybe a lifting of the chin and the chest away. So this is like the Cobra, but unsupported. So you're really engaging the muscles of the lower back to maintain this position. If that's comfortable for you, you can explore lifting one leg or even both legs. Arms can be out in front. This actually makes it a little bit more challenging. You can have them out to the side, or you can have them behind you. And you can do phases again. You don't have to hold for a long period of time. Maybe holding up, breathing as you're holding, not holding your breath, holding up for a few seconds, and then lowering back down. If that's too intense for you, you just stay with that Cobra variation. So we have one more pose. This is a half plank pose, Ardha Phalakasana. A good core strengthener. Again, we come into a position starting with either your palms on the floor and forearms on the floor, or you can turn your hands so that the palms are facing each other, or make a fist and have the knuckles facing each other. In this position, we're simply going to lift our hips up from the floor. So you can engage this from Cobra pose, our starting position, and just lifting the pelvis up. So we have a fairly neutral line, a nice long line from the back of the neck, along the spine, the hips to the heels. We don't want to be dipping a lot. We don't want our butt to be pressing up. A fairly nice long line. Again, this can be fairly challenging, so you don't need to hold it for a long time. You can do it in repetitions where you're just holding up for a few seconds, keeping that breath going, and lowering back down. So you can explore a number of repetitions of that. Because we've been doing a lot of more strengthening yoga poses, it's a nice one to come back to just to help integrate some of the work that you've been doing, create a little bit more balance in your body in the restful position of Savasana, the restful pose. Very simple to do. Do this just by lying down on our backs, little space between the heels, a little distance between the hands and the hips. If this feels a little uncomfortable for the lower back, you can get a bolster, rolled up towel, rolled up blanket, place that underneath the knees just to offset any compression that you might feel in the lower back. And then simply resting in this position. Physically, this is one of the more easy poses to do, but mentally one of the more challenging because we're not doing much where we're actively stretching or actively strengthening. The big challenge in this pose is to create some stillness of the mind. The mind has a tendency to wander from thought to thought, just jumping around, sometimes randomly from this thought to that thought. What we're trying to do in this pose is bring some stillness to the mind and let the stillness of the mind really follow the stillness of the body. A couple ways you can do that is just cycling through all of the spots in your body where you feel support on the floor, some contact between your body and the bolster or your mat or the floor or whatever props that you have. And just a quick check-in with those support points, acknowledging that, yeah, my body's making contact with this surface and I don't need to hold on there. I can really just let my body settle into that contact point, settle into that surface, and even making that acknowledgement, just giving your body permission to let go, just allowing some softness of the muscles and the joints in that region. And that's really one of our goals, is to allow the body to be settled, but also encouraging a little settling or quieting of the mind. So you can do that constant, continuous check-in. I feel my head supported, letting go around my head and neck. I feel my shoulders supported, letting go around my shoulder and arm. I feel my hips supported, letting go through my hip and my knee. I feel my heel supported, letting go through my calf. Just that constant cycling around of those contact points to give your mind a fulcrum or a little goal to help deter its tendency, again, to jump around from thought to thought. Alternatively, a nice one is to just focus on your breathing, just a constant attention to your breath. Whether it's the sound of the air as you're breathing, or the feeling of your body expanding and retracting, recoiling as you're breathing in and out, the temperature of the air as you're drawing it in through your nose, the temperature of air if you're letting it go through your nose or your mouth. Just bringing your mind to either of those contact points or to some element of your breath. Every time you notice that your mind has kind of strayed from that intention of being aware of those contact points or being aware of your breath, just gently nudging it back to your focus, the contact points, the breath. Over and over, it's going to happen, your mind will stray, but just that gentle invitation of the mind to refocus time and time again. So, some examples of some core exercises based on the McKenzie back program, yoga version of the McKenzie back program. A lot of those poses or exercises or positions from the McKenzie program are really based on yoga poses. And again, you should really check with healthcare professional you trust, whether it be your doctor or a physio or a chiro or an osteopath that you're working with, someone who has some knowledge about the body, someone who has some knowledge about the spine and spinal health and disc health. And thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Robbie S.D. Willick. Namaste.